I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm so happy, Brady, that it worked out. So we do tonight have our two teams together. It's the first time that they've been brought together virtually, the New York City Marathon team and also the Sydney Marathon team. And the Sydney Marathon team, obviously, they are running their marathon before New York. So they're a little bit further along in their training, I hope. So a little bit something about Brady Holmer. We're so happy to have you here tonight. Brady is a leading voice in the world of endurance running. He's the host of the amazing podcast, Physiologically Speaking, where he breaks down the science of everything. I mean, performance, recovery, of health, of really every aspect of endurance running. And also, Brady, you wrote the terrific book. It's an ebook. I have a copy. And a few of our runners, after receiving the email from me about this meeting, also got it. And it's about improving your VO2 max, which we all care about. So the way this is going to go, everyone, is I do want you all muted so that I can read the questions that you all sent to me. They were great questions. Brady will answer them and maybe add a little more context. And then we will open it up for live Q&A. And at that point, of course, please unmute yourselves and ask away. And then there'll be just some final takeaways and tips that Brady might want to share. So, okay, let's get going. Brady, anything you want to say to the two teams before we get started with the questions?
Just thanks for joining. Thanks for your awesome questions. I'm excited to get into all this stuff. So not much else to add other than, it's cool that everybody's here to join and learn more about how to, optimize their training. I'm sure you guys are doing awesome in terms of your build for your respective marathons, but hopefully I'll provide a lot of added context to the questions you had today. And, afterwards, obviously, if I didn't answer something or you want me to go in depth on maybe one of the questions you already submitted, happy to do that as well, time permitting.
Okay.
So yeah, excited to get into
Thank
things.
you.
And again, thanks for the invite.
Okay, really, thank you so much. Okay, let's go. So the first, I grouped them into categories, if you will. So the first one's about training strategy and philosophy. What's one lesson, Brady, from your own training or racing that changed how you approach endurance or speed training?
I think the biggest thing that in the past couple years that I've changed and learned and iterated on is that runners, we tend to be like type A personalities. And a lot of us, if we say ran in high school or college, we tend to kind of be in this mindset of the week is 7 days long and our running week needs to be planned on this 7 day schedule. We do speed workout on Wednesday, we do a long run on Saturday or Sunday, wash, rinse, repeat. And that works, and it's obviously been, runners have been doing that for decades. But I think as I've gone through my own marathon training and done several different marathon cycles and just thought about, what can I do to improve my own training or change things up just to keep it exciting, I think I've tried to get out of the mindset of 7 day cycles of training, speed work on the same day every week, and thinking more of, if I don't want to do a speed workout every week, I don't really have to. Maybe one of my easy runs, I just end up picking it up for the last few miles, and that's my speed work for the week. Maybe I'm going to do my long run every 9 days instead of every 7 days, or every 2 weeks instead of every single week. So I just think that, everybody here could shift their framework in terms of how you think about your training and, feel free to, I'm not saying you need to skip every single workout. That can lead into, bad patterns. But if there's a particular week where, the speed workout just isn't necessarily, you don't feel the vibe or something like that, I think it's fine to iterate, maybe switch your speed workout from a Wednesday to a Friday. Just be flexible in your training because most of us, a lot of us are on a training plan, especially everybody, I think, in this meeting and probably following some sort of plan. But I think it's, learning to be flexible is something that I've definitely done in the past few years. And it's allowed training, at least for me, to be a little bit more fun because I'm not, holding myself to, I have to do this on this day. And so I think just restructuring the way you think about training, that's kind of one of the lessons, I guess you could call it a lesson that I've learned in the past couple of years.
As you've evolved as a runner. Thank you for that. And anyone new who's joined, please mute yourselves while we're going through this period of our session. So I feel in a way you didn't exactly answer this next question already, but it's very connected. What's something runners tend to obsess over that really at the end of the day doesn't matter all that much?
I think, yeah, my last answer to the question could kind of fit there, and I think we'll talk about some of these later, but maybe the importance of stretching and recovery tools. I'll put recovery tools in quotes. I think that runners myself included, sometimes obsess over this idea of recovery when in reality, recovery sometimes just involves doing nothing. You know, when you're not running, you are recovering. When you're sleeping, you're recovering. And we all tend to love what can we add to our training to promote recovery or speed up my recovery, when in reality, it's like sitting on the couch and watching football for 10 hours might be your best bet for recovery and eating a nutritious meal versus, I have my boots and I'm, hydrating with all my electrolytes and taking all these different supplements. I think sometimes simpler is better. As much as I love, being like the how can I like biohack my way to a better performance? I love supplements and I love all these recovery tools. I own plenty of them, but I think we put a little too much importance on this process of recovery. Training is really what matters, and recovery is, it can be an active process, but in a lot of ways, it's just, hands off, relax, and you'll recover and adapt.
Great answer. I love that answer. Okay, what's the most efficient way for marathoners to improve speed without risk of injury?
Something lately that's very popular and I think is a great way that I've been building speed for myself and that I think runners are starting to embrace is this idea of strides. So everybody kind of knows what strides are and probably have been doing them for a long time if you're a runner, but essentially just 15 to 30-second long, yeah, I won't call them sprints because they're not supposed to be sprints, but up tempo runs that you would usually place at the end of a run. So say you're going to do your easy run, 6 to 10 mile run, you run 6 miles easy, and then at the end you're going to do 6 to 8 of these strides. And these are really where you focus on your form. You're running fast, but also with good form. And that's why, it's not a speed workout. It's sort of, you can think of it as like a biomechanical, neuromuscular type of stimulus. And it's a really good way to build your speed without injury risk because they're not long enough to really fatigue you. They're not, a long 20-minute tempo run where your form might start to break down. So you're really able to focus on running fast with good form. You stop after, say, 100 meters, you rest a little bit, and you do them again. You do it 6 to 8 times every week, and it's a really good way to hone your pure speed, which it might not seem relevant. Oh, why am I going to run 100 meters fast if I want to run a faster marathon? But if you get faster at 100 meters, 400 meters, the mile, your marathon time is going to improve because your marathon pace will become easier if you're just able to run faster, more controlled. And another iteration on strides would be hill sprints. And I think those are probably even more important or more beneficial maybe than the strides because those will really reduce your injury risk. I think sometimes with strides, it's easy to run a little bit too fast. I know this, sometimes I would do strides and I end up like doing sprints instead. But with hill strides, you can only run so fast. So the mechanical kind of demand, the mechanical loading of a hill sprint is a little bit less than that of a stride. So I've heard them described as speed work in disguise because you're not really going fast if you're running up a hill, but you're replicating the form that you would be using when you're running fast. And so hill sprints can be a great way to develop your speed sort of, in a covert way without doing actual speed work. So I would definitely recommend 2 to 3 times per week on your easy run days, just add in some strides, do a few hill sprints. Again, I don't like to use the word sprint because you kind of want to be aware of not really running too hard, but hill strides after runs. And I think that can lead to, these measurable improvements in performance.
So just to clarify the strides, and that's intriguing. So you think like after an easy run, you said do maybe 6 or 8 of these, and then when you say rest in between, do you mean like a slow jog or walk
I would
or
just walk. Yeah, so 6 to 8 of them seems to be good. You don't want to do too many of them because then it can just turn into you don't want to turn this into a workout. You really just kind of want it to be a supplement to your training. So 6 to 8 is typically what I like to do. And the recovery in between, just walk for 30 seconds and then repeat. You let your heart rate come down and then do the stride again. I think that's kind of, again, it's not supposed to be a workout. So you don't want to go into each stride being out of breath. So you just want to make sure you're fully recovered, do it again fresh. Again, that's kind of through that reducing your injury risk perspective. So each of the strides should feel kind of fresh and not too fatigued at the end of it.
perfect? Okay. And if anybody has any questions about that, you can ask when we're done with this part of it. So what's your view on doing extra low intensity runs, like a 2 mile easy run every day, even if they're not part of a training plan? Could this lead to overtraining?
Yeah, I read that question and I really liked it because I think, runner, the idea of doubling is, doing 2 runs in a day, say, is I think a good way for some people to get in extra mileage if they're trying to add more mileage to their training. And an easy 2 mile run, for me, I think if you were going to do it a couple times per week, the risk of what we call overtraining with that, I think is quite low, especially if you keep that intensity just low enough. So I think it would be a great way to say, if you want to you're trying to increase your mileage every week by 10, 15 miles. Yeah, go on heck, it could even be a 1 mile run, 1 to 2 mile run, maybe every afternoon if you have some time. It's not really going to make you too fatigued, probably. If you did a workout that morning, you should be able to do a couple miles easy. I think, yeah, risk of overtraining, risk of even injury with that, if you're going to go only 2 miles, is still pretty low. So I think that would be a great strategy for somebody looking to increase their miles rather than say do maybe an extra 5 or 7 mile run once or twice a week, do 2 mile run, 4 or 5 times a week. There you go. You have 10 extra miles that week and didn't take too much time out of your schedule, didn't really take too much energy away. And it honestly could just be a good way to, you've sat at work all day. I just want to go for a 2 mile shakeout jog before dinner. I think that's a great strategy as well.
Okay, good. And what advice do you have for runners who consider themselves slow, especially when it comes to pacing and race day strategy?
Well, slow is all relative, so we won't go calling anyone slow. Your slow might be someone else's fast and vice versa. So I think my biggest recommendation there would just be really to let's just talk about it in the context maybe of a race, but just run your own race. I mean, I think it's easy, even for people who wouldn't maybe consider themselves slow, to get caught up if you're in a race. I'm going to try to go with a pace group ahead of me, or, I have a friend who's running a little bit faster and I want to stick with them on race day. I just think running your own race is the best way to be on race day. There's so many people in a marathon that it's easy to kind of just, lock in and just, enjoy it and make sure to stick on your pace. So I would just say stick to the plan, not necessarily divert if you maybe get tempted by running with a faster pace group. Probably not the best idea, especially when it comes to a marathon.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Any key training differences you'd recommend for runners in their 50s and beyond?
I think with age, recovery becomes more important. Just meaning, again, going back to this recovery idea, just more time probably in between workouts. Your recovery capacity, sort of how well you regenerate from one workout to the next, is going to be reduced a little bit as one ages. And so I would say consider placing more time in between your workouts if possible. Focus on protein. I know protein's like the hot macronutrient these days. And I think though for older adults, and I won't define what older adult is in this case, lest I offend anybody, but older adults, there's good evidence that they might need a little bit more protein than say younger adults, or they did when compared to their younger selves. So I would focus on protein, especially just throughout the day after your workout to help with recovery. And then, embracing cross training if you haven't already. I think going back to that idea of, you need to be running 6 or 7 days a week. Maybe 1 or 2 days a week, substitute a run for go on a bike ride, or maybe go on a walk with a weighted vest, or go on a swim. I think that those things can, you're not running as much and you may think they'd be detracting from your fitness, but I think in the long run, if doing a cross training session instead of a run allows you to then train harder on a run later on down the week, I think it's a net benefit. So I think those strategies for, people in their 50s and beyond might be solid, but the recovery piece, I think probably the most important there.
Great, great. And I started running at 50 and I started with the Galloway program, the run walk program. So for now, we're going into environment and kind of getting ready for different temperatures. So for runners training in extreme heat and humidity, like in Florida, or certainly what we're all experiencing here in New York City and the like, what's the best way to prepare for a race that will take place in a much cooler conditions?
Yeah, that's an interesting
Different
question
conditions,
because
really.
yeah, a lot of the time it's sort of the opposite. Runners
Right.
are runners are concerned that, well, I live in New York and I'm going to be doing a race in Texas or Florida. It's 50 here. How do I train for the heat? So this is kind of the opposite idea, which I think is kind of relevant because you want to, you want to train sort of for the environment you're going to be racing in. But luckily, I think it's easier to go from training in the heat to the cool because a lot of the adaptations that you'll get from running in this gross weather that everyone in the United States has been dealing with lately, the humid training, the heat training, those are going to carry over to your cool weather race. Similar to, say, if you were training at altitude and then did a race at sea level, you're kind of going to perform way better when you're training in the heat going to cool. And I don't think it would. So to use the example, I guess, if you were just training in the cool all the time and you went and raced in the heat, you'd probably perform a lot worse because you're not ready for it. I don't think you have to get ready for the cooler conditions like you do hotter conditions. So you're just going to basically have a net benefit. If you train all summer and then have a fall race and it's much cooler than what you've been training in, that's going to be, you're going to perform much better. You don't really have to prepare for the cool unless it's going to be insanely cold, 30 degrees or below. You might have to do some things there. So what I would say is just embrace the heat, and realize that all your training now, you're just going to perform way better when it's cool. It's going to feel much easier. Your effort's going to be lower. You're just going to have all these beneficial adaptations for the cooler weather. So yeah, kind of embrace heat training and use it as a tool instead. And, realize down the line if it ends up being cooler on race day, which it inevitably will if you're racing in like November or something. So yeah, I think it's like a simulated altitude training almost. I've written about a few studies lately where basically they simulated heat training with like hot baths, and they had all these adaptations which improved their performance at altitude. And so heat is kind of a mimicking altitude in a way. So if you think about it like that, it might not make heat training as miserable. But if you are concerned and sort of want to replicate it, I guess my only recommendation would be maybe do some of your workouts on a treadmill. If I don't think it's a terrible idea actually in some ways. If you're doing a speed workout, it can be hard to hit your paces if it's hot and humid outside. So if you have a key workout, if all of you here are training for, New York or Sydney, if you have a really key workout that you want to nail down and say it's a long run on a Saturday or maybe a interval workout, I would, as much as a treadmill is not ideal, think about doing that workout on a treadmill so you could maybe build your confidence and hit your paces if you wouldn't be able to hit your paces outside because of the heat. So I wouldn't say do it for every run. And, certainly during the summer, no one wants to be confined to a treadmill. But if there's a workout that you're concerned, like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do because it's too hot, think about moving it inside maybe for once. I think that could be a good strategy.
And how should we prepare our bodies for long distance travel before a marathon, especially for those of you in the audience who would be going from the US to Australia to run the Sydney Marathon, especially, and of course, then we have runners around the world who will be traveling to New York, but we're talking about that long distance. We're really talking about Sydney right now. So how can they train for this? How can they get ready?
Yeah, the training is hard, and I think that, if you're gonna be on an airplane and traveling a lot, there's not a lot that you can do maybe to prepare your body for that. But I think that there are things that you can do structurally to kind of prepare to make sure that when you arrive, you're sort of ready to run, a proper race. So the first thing I think is like nutrition. So if you're traveling, and this is regardless of if you're traveling, halfway across the world or even, a few hours or a different time zone in the United States, I think because if it's the week of the race, nutrition is, of course, very important there. So plan out, what you're going to eat, maybe bring along snacks because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're 6 hours into your flight, you got 6 hours to go, and there's nothing really for you to eat except the peanuts and the pretzels that they're handing out on the airplane. And sort of, you don't want to sabotage your race because you didn't prepare with nutrition adequately. So I would say, find things that you like that would be permitted to take on the airplane, travel snacks, travel food, just to kind of make sure you're going to be able to have what you need to eat while you're traveling. And you don't want that to be a variable that gets thrown off because of long distance travel. So that would be one thing. Second, I think, especially with this long distance travel, if it's say going to Australia, consider sleep. So maybe bring earplugs and an eye mask on the plane so you're able to get that quality sleep and that rest if you need to. Being prepared there, I think, is another good strategy. Arriving a few days early, regardless again of whether you're traveling to Australia or if you're going, across to a different state. Arrive a few days early just to sort of like get your legs back. I mean, even if you're traveling by car, but especially by plane, it takes a while once you arrive somewhere to say like, oh, I feel really good and I feel like my legs have finally come back. If your plane lands Saturday night in Australia and you're racing Sunday morning, might not have the best experience on race day. So get there a couple days early, let yourself acclimate just both to being on land and just sort of the different time zone. And then that brings me to the last thing is the time zones. So if you're doing a race in a different time zone. Maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 10 to 12 hours, like in Australia. I would consider, this is kind of maybe getting deep into the weeds, deeper than some people might like want to with their training, but consider doing a workout or a run at the time here that corresponds to when the race is going to happen in Australia to get your body used to exercising at that time. Because, our bodies do have these circadian rhythms. And so if you're running a race at 8 a.m., say in Australia, but back home it's, midnight or 10 p.m. on your biological clock, your body's not used to exercising. Then not to say you can't race well, we're adaptable. We can do anything we put our minds to. But if you really want to run the best race possible, you kind of need to take that into account. So think of, if you wake up for your workout today, what time is it in Australia? And maybe you need to do a workout at 11 p.m. a few times during your training block to correspond to when that start time is in Australia. So I think it could just be something to think about, maybe doing a few times to get your body clock on the actual time zone of the place you're going to be racing. To use a less drastic example, I guess, say you're traveling to California and, you live in New York and you're going to be doing a race in California. Consider, shifting your workout a couple hours ahead, just so you're getting used to like that start time in California, for example. So starts at 6 a.m. in California. Maybe you want to do your workouts at 9 or 10 a.m. in New York instead of your regular 6 a.m., just so your body clocks kind of get aligned to that. Not saying you need to do it every day, but it could be useful.
That's really brilliant. And at our next Zoom meeting, our team meeting with the Sydney group, I'm really curious what you all think about that, if anyone's going to actually do that. But it sounds like it really makes sense. Not easy to do,
Certainly
but
not.
it sounds like it really makes sense.
Mhm.
So what about recovery after a race if you have a 15+ hour flight ahead of you, which is going to be the case for everybody, on our Sydney team? And any tips to help minimize stiffness, soreness, swelling, and so on?
Yep. This is where those recovery garments actually come into play and could actually be useful. So calf sleeves, leg sleeves. I don't know if they'd allow you to wear Normatec boots on the plane, but heck, if you could sneak them on and somehow get yourself in a pair of Normatec boots on the plane, be my guest, that might help as well. So definitely think about investing in some compression socks. That's just going to help sort of increase that blood flow while you're on the plane, and that's going to let you feel a lot less sore when you eventually get off. So I would highly recommend just investing in some of those. You can get a pair for probably $50 or less. There's not a lot of good evidence for compression for other stuff, but it does improve blood flow. It will probably help you feel a little bit less sore, especially if you're sitting for 12 to 15 hours on a plane. So use compression garments liberally. That would be my, number one thing. There are, maybe some of you have one of these, but like electrical muscle stimulation devices. Sometimes it looks like you can buy one. It looks like a little iPod. It has a couple wires in it. And basically you just attach these little electrodes to your legs and it pulses a short, very low intense kind of electrical stimulation into whatever body part you put on. Those can also help promote blood flow. I have one. I think I got it for $25 on Amazon and I use it all the time. I would, suggest investing in one of those too. Maybe that could probably help. You really just get like it literally stimulates your muscles. And so if you're
That's Brady, sorry to interrupt you. Is that TENS, TEN?
tens, yeah. Yep, a
Okay.
TENS device. And so you can find
That's
those for
easy to get.
relatively cheap. Yep,
Uh-huh.
they're not invasive, they don't hurt. I mean, it really is kind of just getting like a little massage. So if I were to say like compression boots are one of those or compression socks, I would probably suggest like a TENS device. I think that could be super beneficial. And then last thing, I would say when you're on that plane, just get up as much as possible and walk down the aisle a couple times. That's going to be probably the best thing, even again, compared to those recovery tools I just mentioned, like every 30 minutes, if you can, just get up, do a few laps, we'll call them, throughout the airplane aisle, stand up, do a little bit of stretching. That's going to be the best thing versus, staying seated in the same position for 10, 12, 15 hours.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if you recommend like just conking out and going to sleep or walking around, moving your body. It sounds like that really makes sense. Hopefully
You might not feel like walking. And again, I think the marathon is over. So in a way, you're just like, if you get off the plane and you're kind of stiff and not sore, whatever, you've done it, you've completed your goal race, like you're going to maybe take a couple weeks off anyway. So it might not matter that much, but it's never great feeling terrible, and anything that you can do to feel less bad in the week after a marathon, I think is probably the best.
Good, very good advice. Okay, so now we're going into questions about nutrition, fueling, supplements, and so on. So, what does your ideal weekly nutrition plan look like during marathon training, and especially regarding carb loading before long runs and before race day?
Yeah, nutrition's a weird one. And so what I won't talk about is kind of like what to eat, because when it comes to specific foods, because every runner likes different things, everybody has different dietary patterns. And one thing is for certain, like carbohydrates during marathon training are obviously important, as is protein for adequate recovery. So I think the best way to talk about what an ideal week might look like is sort of one of the things that's become important to me lately, and I say me in general, but just in talking about it and sharing the research, is the importance of timing. And this is something that I've actually changed kind of my practices on a lot. And I think a lot of runners probably aren't great at if they were anything like me. But, you know, I think timing your nutrition around workouts, and meaning eating as close to the end of your workout as you possibly can to start, like, kickstart that recovery process, is definitely, I think, one of the key changes that you can make versus, say, waiting a few hours afterwards. How much you eat throughout the day to support your training is obviously important. Just unless you're trying to lose weight, you don't really want to be in a calorie deficit. You want to eat enough to support your training. That's kind of the mindset of most runners, and they don't take into consideration timing a lot. It's like, oh, I finished my workout at 9 a.m. Maybe I'll have a protein bar with my coffee, and then I'll just wait and eat lunch a few hours later. But I think shifting that mindset to saying, let's focus the majority of what I'm going to eat during this day on the timing around my workout. And then obviously, make sure to get in food the rest of the day. So ideally, that weekly structure would say, get in a meal after you finish your workout. I think that's definitely important in terms of structure day to day. So that's like your just general day to day nutrition. Make sure it contains, some carbohydrates. Ideally, that seems to matter more than protein. Some people may be familiar with this idea of, like, it's called the anabolic window of protein. And lifters thought that, if you didn't eat protein right after you lifted, you were going to just sacrifice all your gains. There was like this 30-minute window. And if you didn't eat protein within that window, your gains were kind of lost and the workout was ruined. That doesn't seem to be the case with protein, but it does with carbs. So if you delay your carb intake after your workout, you perform worse the next day compared to if you ate carbs immediately after. So I would get something in immediately after, even if, like I said, you can only get like a maybe nutrition bar, but try to get in a good meal within, I'd say, 60 minutes of finishing most of your workouts, especially if it's a high intensity speed workout or a long run. So
Yeah.
that would be kind of number one. Again, carb heavy meals, just focusing calories, protein around workouts in terms of timing. Eating maybe, frequently throughout the day. Again, that's a lot of individual as well. Some people like eating 5, 6 small meals, some like 2 to 3. So I don't have any, maybe great recommendations there, or to tell people you need to eat more often versus less. Just as long as you're getting enough, kind of doing the structure throughout the day, whatever fits in your lifestyle, is probably the best way. Now, preparing for a long run. So most of us, preparing for a marathon are going to be doing a weekly long run. So I would say the night before, make your dinner maybe a little bit more carbohydrate heavy versus, say, protein and fat heavy. Just because it's going to, I would, without using the scientific term, but, like, just slow you down a little bit less. You want to kind of mimic race day, I guess I would say, in
Yeah.
preparing for your long run. Like, what are you going to eat before your race, or what are you going to try to eat before your race? Kind of mimic that meal, both in timing and what you're going to eat, a few times during your training. I think you need to think of training as kind of practice and like a dress rehearsal. So, if you have a key long run workout, you're going to do your 22-mile long run with some marathon pace stuff. Pretend that you're racing. So the night beforehand, maybe you're going to go to the same restaurant. If you're in New York and you're going to eat at this restaurant before the New York City Marathon, go to that restaurant, have your meal, have it at the same time you're going to do it before race day, and then do your long run the next day. I think that can be super valuable, both just psychologically, but also, does this meal work with my body? Did I perform well in my long run the next day? I think that can be something key as well. And then let's talk about race week then too. I think runners always get anxious sort of with nutrition the week of the race. Certainly, I'm always just like, my wife doesn't like to be around me the week of the race because I'm always just like, oh, I need to eat like the same thing every day at this time, just so that nothing, everything's like optimized. But I think just staying consistent. I mean, we all know, we've all heard the advice not to change anything up. Don't try anything new on race day, but I would say don't really try anything new on race week either. I mean, if you think about it, you've been training for 12, 16, maybe even longer weeks. You've been eating whatever you've been eating, and you've been training fine. You eat what you know your body likes and is able to support your training. Why would you do anything else the week of the race? You don't need to do anything special because you're training. You've been training hard, you've been training high quality, and this is what you've been eating. So I wouldn't change anything up the week of the race. I do tend to sort of limit, and this is a personal preference, but limit my intake of kind of fiber, salads, vegetables, and stuff within a few weeks leading up to the race, just to sort of, I don't know, cut down on the bulk that you're going to have before that. But that's just, again, personal preference. So I would say keep most things the same. Find meals that you like that are somewhat plain, that are going to be, fuel you, and just sort of, yeah, rinse and repeat. So it's not different. You don't really have to kind of takes all that cognitive load away too. I think something that we don't think about a lot is how if you're constantly thinking of all these decisions you need to make, oh, what am I going to eat and when am I going to eat it? That can take a lot of energy away from you, especially during race week. You want to divert all your attention to, you've been tapering, you want to dial in psychologically, and you don't want to have all this mental energy going to figuring out what you're trying to eat. So have a game plan and stick to it, I think, is my best advice there. And then I think there was a part of that question about carbohydrate loading. And this is somewhat, I don't think it's a controversial opinion of mine, but I think carb loading is, I won't call it a myth, but it's certainly not maybe as important as runners think it to be. And here's why. So for one, during the last couple weeks before your marathon, you're running a lot less than you have been during training. So if you're eating the same amount of carbohydrates that you normally do, your muscles are already going to be pretty much fully saturated with glycogen going into that race. So carbohydrate loading is, I don't think there's a downside to eating more carbs than usual, but I don't think we need to be so methodical about eating a ton more than we normally have been. If you've been eating carbohydrates to fuel your training, I would just say on race day, it's going to take care of itself because you're running a lot less during that week. And 1 or 2 low volume days before the race, your glycogen stores, they're full going into that race. The second reason I say carb loading is sort of this myth is that most runners do it wrong. So the traditional practice of carb loading involved what was referred to as like this depletion phase. So essentially, you're 2 weeks out from your race. You essentially do 5 to 7 days where you're going to eat basically a ketogenic diet. So you're going to cut your carbs out almost completely for 5 to 7 days and then reintroduce them. And that was supposed to lead to this super saturation effect where your muscles are basically soaking up more glycogen, muscles and liver, than they could theoretically handle. That has been shown in some studies, but again, unless you're really doing that depletion phase, you're not necessarily carbohydrate loading or getting more carbs in your muscles than normal. Everybody's body has a limit to how many carbs you can store in your muscles and your liver. There's not really, once you hit that ceiling, it's just, you can't go above that. But the point of that depletion phase was that in theory, it would allow your muscles to soak up a little bit more than normal. So unless you're doing that, and I don't think that's really recommended anymore, that depletion phase, because your training mindset is just kind of going to suck. Cutting out carbs completely for 7 days before a marathon, I would not recommend that to anybody. So I would just say don't be, eat carbs, but don't focus on this idea of carbohydrate loading. I think it's a little bit overemphasized.
Okay.
Sorry for the long-winded response there. And
no, that was a great
tricky into
response.
the weeds.
Very, very, very interesting. Okay, so for runners trying to lose a little weight during training, how do you recommend balancing fat loss with maintaining energy and performance?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because, weight loss is a goal for a lot of runners, and even maybe some runners who don't want to lose weight but want to, say, improve their body composition. So lose a little bit of fat, maybe keep or maybe even gain a little bit of muscle. I would say that don't do it during a performance-oriented training phase. So if you're going to try to lose weight, do it during a base building phase. So for instance, all of you right now are kind of in a marathon training block. So I would say, no, this is not the time to try to lose weight. The off season is the time to try to lose weight when maybe you're just focusing on high volume, low intensity. You have a little bit more time for strength training. You're not focused on dialing in a particular pace or optimizing your recovery from workout to workout or running as fast as you can. I think during those periods, that's when you would just want to focus on nutrition, even if that means eating a little more than you probably should. But if you're trying to lose weight, do it during that base building phase where you're not going to take a hit maybe to performance, or at least it's not as consequential. So after your marathon, if you start just building up, rebuilding your aerobic base, and you want to try to lose some weight, we'll call it the off season. That's the best time to do it. And again, I think the best approach there would be, don't cut calories out too drastically. I think the recommendation, especially, for athletes, is maybe 500 calories like a day, but you don't want to lose any more than like 2 pounds a week. And that'll obviously differ depending on how much weight you have to lose, how much you want to lose, but gradual weight loss is certainly better, especially for runners who want to maintain your muscle mass. You don't want to drastically cut it, because if you do really reduce calories drastically, especially if those calories come from protein, you could sacrifice some muscle and, again, like, just a lot of energy. But yeah, my main recommendation, do it in the off season. Losing weight isn't a bad thing. I mean, running's a weight conscious sport and a weight oriented sport, and weight does make a difference. So it's not that runners shouldn't try to lose weight, but don't do it when you're training for a race. Do it in the off season.
Great. Okay. All right. Brady, do you have a general rule of thumb for electrolyte intake on long runs or during a marathon?
That one's also very individual, because it's going to depend on, sweat rate, how much salt you're losing. I think the general recommendation I would say for training, maybe even during a marathon race, is just kind of alternate. So if you have water bottles, one of your water bottle has electrolytes in it, the other just has plain water. I think that's a good way to balance it out. Similarly, if you're in a race, most of us, maybe you're not carrying water bottles, and then unless you're an elite, you don't have water bottles out there on the course for you, unfortunately. So you're at the mercy of the water stops. I would just say at every station, maybe alternate. Unless it's really hot, then you could probably just do electrolytes every single time. But I typically would alternate, get plain water at one water stop, take the Gatorade at the next one, and just kind of alternate. So you don't want to, it's hard to kind of overdo electrolytes, and you want to be sure not to drink just plain water. But in terms of the amounts, again, it's really hard to say. I think 500 to 700 milligrams of sodium maybe per liter of water, if people are kind of looking for a concentration of what to do it. But, if you have a standard race water bottle, just put a packet of electrolytes in there, and that's typically going to cover your bases. And I don't have any particular, brands that I recommend, but you want some sodium in there, of course, potassium, magnesium, kind of the three things you maybe want to look for, but certainly sodium and potassium. Some of them have caffeine. That's great. Some of the electrolyte stuff, but yeah, so I think in general, again, that's just like a general, I think, rule of thumb. When I do a workout, I typically just have a bottle of electrolytes, a bottle of plain water.
So you don't recommend just water?
I would not recommend just water, no, because I think you do run the risk there of maybe just running too low on sodium. Then if you're just drinking plain water, it's very rare to experience like a condition called hyponatremia. Basically, your sodium concentrations get too low. But if you're sweating a lot and you're just drinking water and not replacing that salt, your blood pressure is maybe going to fall a little bit, which you don't necessarily want to happen during a race. And you can run the risk of, your sodium balance in your body being thrown off. So I would not recommend just plain water. No, I would definitely recommend, both in training and racing, having some electrolytes.
Okay, great. Okay, Noon Style, Noon, the brand, low dose electrolytes every morning and post long run versus high dose electrolytes only during and after runs. What do you recommend?
Yeah, I think certainly beforehand, I think having a drink, maybe if you wake up and like to have coffee and maybe breakfast before your run, I think putting Noon in some water and sipping on it could be a good idea. It's sort of this, you're like preloading electrolytes almost in a way before you head out for your run. I think that can be a good idea. During the run, I think you want something with a bit higher of an electrolyte solution. So you call it, I guess, the high dose if we're referring like to the question. And then afterwards, I mean, you want to replenish the electrolytes, but if you've done a good job of hydrating before, I think then maybe doing plain water afterwards and just putting some salt on your food could be fine as well. I mean, I don't think most people need to be drinking electrolytes all day long, despite what, seems to be the case these days. It's like all these companies just selling
I know, baby.
I know, I know. I mean, heck, it tastes good, but we already eat a lot of sodium in our food and stuff, and I think that's something that runners should consider. Like, you can get electrolytes from your water, sure, that's good, and it makes for a tasty drink, but sodium, potassium, all that stuff, if you're eating a pretty balanced diet and putting a little bit of salt on your food, you're probably getting enough. So what I like to do is reserve electrolytes for before and during my workout, and then through the rest of the day, if I'm not going to work out again, basically my electrolytes are just going to come from my food. That's kind of how I prefer it. Again, I'm not concerned about having too much salt or anything, but the electrolytes can get expensive and you don't, probably need them in all of your water. So maybe a food focused electrolyte approach for the afterwards. And then, yeah, high dose during and before. Again, you can use the noon style. So maybe that wasn't the best answer to that question, but I think throwing a noon or something, if it's really hot, for the next few months, having a bottle of water throughout the day that you're just sipping on that does have some noon in there, I don't think that's a terrible idea either.
So noon is considered a low dose. Is that what I'm hearing?
I guess, to be honest, I'm not too familiar with the brand, but I think I have looked at the back of their, I've used them before and looked at the back, and I do think they have somewhat less than some of the other brands. Like one of those tablets, I don't think it's super high in sodium, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they actually contain.
But I guess the person who's asking does know that. That's why she put that, or he put that into the category of low dose. Okay, so now we're moving on to creatine. You said protein was like a hot topic. So is creatine. So what type or brand do you trust? And how should runners incorporate creatine into their routine? I started taking creatine this year.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear because there's actually, we were talking before we started about your stress fracture, and there's some evidence that it can help for bone health as well. So it's probably good that you're taking it. I mean, most people probably should be taking it. You'll hear that a lot now, but it's like the supplement that, once thought, only weightlifters should take it. But there's a lot of somewhat, science-based, but a lot of theoretical too evidence of like why it should help endurance runners, and it certainly isn't going to hurt. As far as brand, I won't, mention any specific brands, but for creatine monohydrate, that's just the type of creatine. That's what you're going to want to look for if you're purchasing it. It's basically just a white powder that comes in a tub. Creatine monohydrate, pretty simple. There is a specific type of it called CreaPure. I guess it's like manufactured in Germany. It's a purer form. So if you're looking for a brand, maybe I will mention brands because if people are interested. So I use a brand called Momentous, and that is the creatine, CreaPure creatine. So that's something that people could look for. I believe Thorne, that's a supplement company. They also sell creatine, but there are plenty of brands out there. Just look for creatine monohydrate and the CreaPure, and that'll kind of cover it. That's what all the research is based on. There's a lot of other forms out there like hydrochloride and some fancier forms of creatine, but those don't do anything more than just the normal stuff does. So that's what I would recommend looking for. In terms of dosing, 5 to 10 grams per day, pretty standard. It's not something that you really need to dose based on body weight. There are some studies that show that, but ultimately just 5 or 10 grams per day. And after a few months, maybe even less than that, so probably 3 to 4 weeks, your muscle stores will be saturated with creatine, and then you start to get those benefits. So what's good to understand about it is that it's not one of these acute things, really. So you don't take 5 grams of creatine before your workout and you have a better workout because you took it. The benefits come once your muscle stores are loaded with creatine. So it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for that to happen. And then you just take it every day, and it will just support your training, basically. It's not something you feel like caffeine. It's just, you could think of it as like a nutrient, basically. I mean, you do get creatine if you're eating steak, if you're eating fish, you're getting creatine from your diet, a couple grams per day. Supplementing just allows you to get more. And I think runners could probably benefit from that. There are creatine gummies. I actually take gummies too sometimes, like during my workouts. I kind of like them as it gives me some carbs during the workout, and I'm also getting creatine, so I use gummies. But if you're using gummies, just kind of maybe do your research. And there was like this Amazon thing that came out they tested a few brands on Amazon and basically found that there were like 4 out of 5 brands had 0 creatine in them. So I would do your research, and there is a brand called Create that sells gummies, and those were actually shown to have actual creatine in them. So be aware if you're looking for the gummies, if you prefer that. But in all honesty, I would just say people look for the creatine powder.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for that. And then another question about creatine. Taking it, does it matter? Like morning with coffee, a post-run smoothie? after strength training? Does it really matter? It sounds like it really doesn't matter, but does it?
It doesn't matter too much, but kind of it does. So in terms of, you can take it every day at any time of day, and your muscle stores are going to be saturated eventually. So in that respect, timing doesn't matter. But there have been some studies to kind of look at what's the best way if you want to maximize the absorption of creatine. And in that case, taking it after a workout appears to be best. So whether that's strength training or a run, I would just recommend, and this is what I do myself, I put it in my post-run shake with protein and all my other supplements, my greens powder. I just like to throw it all in like a shaker bottle and drink it. So take it after your workout. Basically, if you're going to have a meal or something to eat after your workout, pairing creatine with carbs actually probably improves the uptake of creatine, but it also improves glycogen restoration as well. There was like a recent study showing that taking creatine with carbs enhances the speed at which your body starts to resynthesize your glycogen. So I would just say take it with your post-workout smoothie, take it with your post-workout meal. That seems to be the ideal time. But if you forget, if it's not convenient for you to take it then, don't stress too much about it because it doesn't matter that much. It's kind of one of those things, those little knobs that like, oh, it's optimal, but it's not totally necessary.
Okay, so now we're going on to VO2 max. So, which is again, you've written a great book. Everyone, you can get it. When I send this recording around to all of you, I will also include a link to that. All right, so can you share your top insights on increasing VO2 max for marathon performance? And I did, make a note here to say that at least one of our team members just bought your book and was so delighted by it.
Yeah, I appreciate whoever it was who bought that. I appreciate your support. And I would say it's kind of a debate, but it's like the debate on, what's the best type of workout to improve VO2 max is kind of a funny one, and it ultimately all boils down to kind of the same conclusion, which maybe I'll come to at the end of my answer to this question. I think there's without a doubt that the best way to improve, and I would argue the only way to actually improve your VO2 max is through the high intensity interval training. I mean, if you think of VO2 max as your ceiling, how do you raise your ceiling? Well, it's by exercising close to your ceiling. So I mean, it's the high intensity workouts themselves that are best for increasing VO2 max. That being said, the ability to do all those high intensity workouts is supported by your foundation, which is your quote unquote zone 2 training, your easy base building. That's all necessary as well for marathoners to stay healthy and support your high intensity training. So you obviously need both, but I think that there's been almost too much of a focus here on thinking that zone 2 in and of itself kind of improves your VO2 max. I mean, it supports a lot of systems in the body, like your aerobic capacity, that help with VO2 max. But if you want to actually budget, you got to exercise at a high intensity, 90% or more of your maximal heart rate or your VO2 max. So that, my top insight, and all runners already know that they need to do high intensity interval training. So it would be to make sure to do high intensity interval training, pretty regularly, and, supplement it with that base building. But that's not necessarily a novel insight, unfortunately, but it's kind of it's pretty simple. In terms of maybe other strategies other than training, because obviously we could talk about high intensity interval training for hours, but I think there's one strategy, and what I'm really interested in lately is the topic of kind of heat is very popular. So I think that if you're a runner and you're already doing your high intensity training, you're already doing your zone 2, which I know all of you listening now probably are. I think, it's like, what can we do now to maybe tweak or eke out a little bit more VO2 max from what I'm already doing on top of my training? And that's kind of what I'm interested in. And sauna and heat exposure seem to be one way to do that. Similar to, we talked about altitude training earlier. If you go to high altitude and you train, you do that to increase your red blood cells. You do that to increase your VO2 max. Well, the sauna or using like hot water baths after exercise could be one way to, you're already training hard. You can't really maybe pull more out of your training, but doing a sauna after your workout. There have been some pretty interesting studies showing that, say 3, 4, 5 times a week after your workout, doing the sauna for 20 to 30 minutes can enhance adaptations compared to, say, the same training without using the sauna. And that's just because the sauna will stimulate all of these different adaptations in your body, ultimately improving, increasing your red blood cell count, increasing your hemoglobin mass potentially. So that ultimately will lead to improvements in VO2 max as well. So I almost consider it like a hack in a way, to increase your VO2
Sounds like
max,
a
and
hack.
something you can add to your routine if you're able to. And if you're not able to access a sauna, doing hot water baths as well. So like a hot tub or just getting in your hot bath at home for 20 to 30 minutes after, I think is a good strategy as well. I know now that it's in the summer, it might not seem like the most comfortable thing to do after you come in from your sweaty run to get in a sauna or a hot bath, but it can certainly help.
But what about ice baths? I mean, is that
Yeah.
part of this? I mean, does that help if you take an ice bath and then take a sauna, or go back and forth?
Well, yeah, it's funny you brought up ice baths because the more and more research comes out on them, there seems to be little to no benefit of doing an ice bath for really anything. So, runners once thought they were good for maybe delaying inflammation or reducing muscle soreness. Ultimately, I think that maybe they feel good and they help your mind feel stimulated, and that's why this whole cold plunging kind of fad is here, because it's sort of is like this mood enhancer. I think that they're good for that, but in terms of improving your VO2 max or even improving your recovery, there's not, if you like them, do them, but there's really not a lot of good evidence for them. I guess you're mentioning, if you do a hot run, could you cool down in the ice bath and then do the sauna, maybe as a way to bridge, the discomfort that you might feel? I think that could be a good strategy. But then again, the whole idea of the hot bath and the sauna is that your body temperature is elevated, and that's kind of what's leading to a lot of those benefits. So I really wouldn't recommend it cooling down. You're just gonna have to spend more time in the sauna or the hot bath. So I don't think that is maybe the best approach to do it, but maybe after you do the sauna, if you want to jump in the cold tub for a few minutes, that could be pretty refreshing and help. I think I meant to even bring up the cold stuff in my talk on recovery, not about things to implement, but things to avoid. There seems to maybe even be some detriments to using extended cold exposure after your workout. So,
Okay, we'll get to that. For those who may have limited time for high volume training, are there specific VO2 max boosting workouts you recommend?
yeah, I think there's a kind of a classic workout. It's called the Norwegian 4x4. It's just called the Norwegian 4x4 because it was created by a bunch of Norwegian exercise scientists. But this is essentially, I think it's cited a lot and obviously maybe gets too much love, but it's a well-studied protocol. I think that's why it's talked about so much, but it is very efficient and it's a great way to get a great VO2 max workout in. So basically it's just, you do 4 intervals, 4 minutes long at 85 to 90% of your heart rate max, I guess we'll use in this case, because you're not measuring oxygen uptake during your workout, but 85% or more of your VO2 max. The 4 minute interval seems to be in that kind of sweet spot of where you're going to optimize the VO2 max improvements, like 1 to 4 minutes. That seems to be probably even more 2 to 4 minutes, but a great interval duration for kind of improving your VO2 max. So it's a 16-minute workout. You have recovery intervals in between each of 3 minutes, but ultimately it's going to take you 40, 45 minutes. Really effective way to kind of increase VO2 max. I think I do describe that workout in my book as well as among one of the other ones to improve it. So that's well cited. It's well studied. It's pretty efficient, time efficient in a way. I mean, at some point, if you want to optimize your VO2 max, you're going to have to put time into it, and there's no hack there. The 10-minute workout for runners who are pretty well trained, it might not lead to the improvements that you want it to. So, 40, 45 minutes for most runners, especially those of you here who are accustomed to marathon training, is somewhat of a short workout, actually. So you could kind of
It is.
optimize your timing there. Another one, kind of one of my favorites, I mean, the 20-minute tempo run. So I think, the 4x4 is kind of your like real high intensity workout. 20-minute tempo run, you can get a lot of benefit from that. I mean, that's like one, I keep a 20-minute tempo run in all of my marathon training blocks just because it's seems pretty quick. If you put a 10-minute warm up and cool down on either end and you sandwich that 20-minute tempo run in there, great kind of VO2 max boosting workout too. A little bit lower intensity, but it's like that threshold intensity. That's a real good sweet spot for improving VO2 max. And then lastly, another strategy.
Before you go on,
Yeah.
just explain that a little bit more. What do you actually do?
Okay, yeah. Sorry for not explaining that. So 20-minute tempo run. So your tempo pace, there are varying definitions of it, but a tempo pace is essentially, I like to describe it as something that you you should end it feeling like you could have gone for probably another 5 minutes. So you don't want to be totally gassed at the end of it. But yeah, you're just going to run easy for 10 minutes. So do a 10-minute warm up, do 20 minutes of a tempo run. So I would say your tempo pace, maybe your 5K race pace, add 30 to 45 seconds.
Okay.
And then, or maybe your, yeah, 5K race pace plus 30, 45, or maybe your marathon pace minus 30 seconds or something like that. Do that for 20 minutes and then just go straight into a 10-minute cool down. You don't really even have to stop in between if you don't want to. Again, that could kind of lead to that time efficiency there. But what I like to do is just cruise into it. I end my warm up, cruise into the tempo, finish it, do a 10-minute cool down. There you go. You have a 45-minute workout done and very effective. And it's not something that I find the tempo runs to be somewhat enjoyable because you're not, again, completely left like breathless by the end of it. So I think that can be just something good to add to the schedule.
So what recovery methods do you personally use and recommend? Like compression boots, you mentioned Theragun, foam rolling, massage. I'm throwing some icing into there too. And what's the best timing for them? Like I really would like your current thinking about icing as part of
Totally. Yeah. So let's just talk about icing first then. So I think that the traditional thinking with ice and then kind of like why we're learning now that it's not ideal and perhaps even kind of like flipped on its head or totally wrong. I think, we've used ice baths for decades. Athletes have used it for decades because the idea is that when you work out, there's inflammation. Inflammation contributes to muscle soreness. Muscle soreness contributes to poor performance. I think that is the case if you're in the Olympics and you have to run a 3-meter semifinal on Friday, another semifinal on Saturday, and the 1,500-meter final on Sunday. Well, you don't really care about your adaptations at that point. You want to recover as quickly as possible. You want to feel as good as possible. So taking an ice bath might be good for someone in the Olympics doing multiple rounds of whatever event that they're doing. But when it comes to training, the goal is, your adaptations. You're training what you do today. You want that to lead to a better marathon performance in 10, 12, 16 weeks. And the inflammatory response after exercise is a key part of that. So we don't want to reduce that. It's actually the opposite. You want inflammation and you want the body to naturally resolve that inflammation because over time, that's what contributes to the beneficial adaptations of your workout, whether it's aerobic exercise training or strength training, especially strength training. So there have been a lot of studies recently showing like if you take a ice bath in close proximity to your workout, I don't think it's the same case if you're to separate it, say by 10 to 12 hours, but say you finish your run, you go and you take an ice bath for 30 minutes, or you do a strength training workout and you sit in the ice bath for 30 minutes. That seems to impair some of the benefits that you're going to get long-term from whatever workout you just did. And also, there have been some studies lately showing that it might not even reduce muscle soreness that much, contrary to what and the theory kind of shows. Like they're supposed to promote recovery, but they don't really. What actually does seem to promote recovery better, and I actually just wrote about this study in my newsletter, is hot water immersion. Heat appears to be better for recovery, and it doesn't come with those negative effects on your long-term adaptations compared to cold. So heat seems to be much better than cold in those respects. But I'm not going to discourage anybody from using the cold. Again, I think a lot of people enjoy it. And a lot of people do feel better after taking an ice bath, myself included. I mean, 10, 15 minutes in the ice bath, you feel a little bit better after. You feel less sore. My recommendation would probably just be to do it maybe in the afternoon of a morning workout or something. Just allow like 6 to 8 hours maybe in between that, just so that you have kind of enough of a window in between that you're not really going to impair any of those adaptations. So that's kind of the thinking there in terms of ice just doesn't seem to be that good of a recovery tool. But I think that leads into my thinking about recovery tools in that if it makes you feel better, it's probably helping you recover, regardless of what the science says. Sure, I'm always like, oh, what's the science say? But personal preference and personal experience matters too with all of these things. And so that leads into what, I'm not going to maybe go in deep into specific recovery tools that I think are beneficial. Maybe I'll touch on some, but if you're using something and it makes you feel better after your run and then you perform better the next day because of it, I would say continue to use it. That, means if you have a pair of Normatec boots and you love using them every single day, I don't care if there's any science to support whether they work or not. If you feel better when you use them, That's great. It's gonna help your training. Same thing with a massage. Same thing with a sauna. Some people like it, some people don't. But if it helps you feel better in the long run, I think it's a good recovery tool. And unless there's really a contraindication, like maybe the ice, that this is negatively impacting your training, then I would say that it's probably fine to go ahead and use those. So personal preferences, what I'm using lately, I'm a huge fan of the sauna or the hot tub, I think, again, just to the sauna feels good for me. And it is a stress. I think people need to realize that because you're getting in there and theoretically you could do too much sauna and, risk that. But I think as a recovery tool, I love it for promoting blood flow and just making me feel better, relaxing a little bit. Any water immersion though, actually seems to help with recovery. So it doesn't have to be hot. If it's the summer, so pools are open. I mean, if you just go in a pool, you don't even have to do a swimming workout, but just go and like wait around in a pool for 30 minutes. And I think that can help recovery because when you're in the water, there's the hydrostatic pressure that's almost acting as like a compression boot in a way, or a compression sock. So just being in water is going to help you recover. And it feels good. You're cooling down, you're out in the sun. So I think there's a lot of benefits associated with that. So just water immersion of any kind, good recovery. And I try to use that as well. And then lastly, I think just like walks, going on a walk, I think at the end of the day or after your run as a cool down or middle of the day, just as a break, promoting blood flow really as part of the recovery process. And whatever does that, I think is going to help. So if it's going for a walk, if it's getting a massage, if it's getting in the sauna, if it's going for a light bike ride, like down to the grocery store, anything like that, those are going to be good things to quote unquote promote recovery because sort of the blood flow is what helps enhance the recovery process.
And what about a steam room? Like you mentioned sauna. What if you don't have a sauna, but you can have access to a steam room? So it's like hot but wet. Is that better as the same or not as effective as sauna?
Not as effective just because they're not as hot. I mean, if you stayed in there long enough, I think that you could get your body temperature up, which seems to be one of the main things. So it might be a little bit more difficult to get your body temperature up. I'm not a huge fan of steam rooms just personally. I don't find it as like enjoyable as the sauna, but yeah, if that's all you have, it's warm. I think there could certainly be benefits there. They do tend to be relaxing too, which again, relaxation is good for recovery too.
Yeah, for sure. What's your stance on taking Advil or Aleve or something like that pre-run for prevention, right? Or during long runs for pain, after for recovery, or avoid altogether? What are your thoughts about that?
Avoid altogether to handle pain. I think I would make the argument that if you are needing to take one of these before your run, you probably shouldn't be running. You should probably be resting. But pre-run, I think, especially if you're, or pre and during, I guess I'll combine them because if you take it pre-run, it's going to be in your system during. Combining exercise with, we'll call them non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or NSAIDs, especially combined with, say, heat and dehydration, big risk for kind of kidney injury, causing some damage to kidneys, liver, things like that. So I would certainly avoid it there. Don't take them during runs, especially if it's going to be hot out. There's a lot of good studies too, even showing that like combining those with heat, not a good combination. And then afterwards, they also don't seem to be beneficial. And that goes back to the idea of inflammation that I just talked about with the ice bath. So if you're in pain or if you're just trying to say, oh, I want to reduce the inflammation after my run, well, that's part of the adaptive process. You want the inflammation to happen. And so taking a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory is going to blunt that inflammatory process and it's going to blunt the adaptations to exercise. And there's, again, a lot of good science to support that as well. If you take NSAIDs after a workout, your workout is less effective compared to if you didn't take them.
Thank you for that. Wow, that's pretty incredible information. Because I think I know many, many people who like to take a little leave before they go out on their long runs. I think once or twice I've done that myself.
Oh, yeah,
Really, really,
we
really
all
good.
have. And there was actually this interesting, I won't call it a scandal, but like a couple months ago, there was a group of, or there were a couple of these, I guess I'll call them like running influencers on TikTok or Instagram, a few women who I think they got ads that were like sponsored by Advil basically, and they were sort of recommending this to their audience, like, oh, I take Advil before my runs to help me manage pain. And I think it was tied into, like certain symptoms associated with menstruation and maybe things like handling that. But ultimately, I think a lot of them removed their posts because, I mean, even I commented on this and like some of the major running platforms commented on it like, hey, this is like this is dangerous health advice. Like they're promoting this like it's a supplement, but it's not. It's a medication. And so I just thought
Yeah.
that was kind of crazy that they were, getting paid to kind of promote Advil, when it could really kind of be harmful. But that was just kind of an interesting something I saw in the last couple months that was sort of surprised me.
Yeah. Everyone, I've come to the end of your questions. I have a few, but I don't want to go to my questions until we've gotten to yours. So now everyone, if you can unmute yourselves, and if you all Muriel, to everyone listen on the go. So I'm sorry. Let me just see. Want to make sure get my question in case I can't ask it. How to avoid, it's about injury, how to avoid, but also once you do tweak something in training, how do you bounce back and how much time should you take? Okay,
Mm.
that's a question.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. It's
You
it's
think-
kind of hard to say without context, like what the injury is, how much
Right.
time you should take off. I mean, take off enough time until the you don't, you stop feeling the injury, I guess, but that one's hard to answer without, a context of what the injury is. And, I'd say go and see a physical therapist or maybe to see what their recommendation would be there.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I couldn't agree more with that. And Jill, go ahead. You have a question?
I do. And Brady, I'm so sorry if you answered this. I had to take a phone call about 15 minutes ago. And so if you answered it, just tell me and I will listen to the record. But I ran Grandma's Marathon a week and a half ago, I guess, in brutally humid conditions after training in the cold. But now I'm running Sydney at the end of August. And I'm curious to know, like, if I look at my training plan for Sydney, it has me running 17 miles this weekend, which I know I'm not doing. But how do I kind of bridge the two marathons? And if you already answered this, again, I'll watch the recording.
No, I don't think I answered that one. So, I would say, well, congrats on, finishing grandma's. And I would say since you just finished and I'm sure you've taken, a little bit of time off and hopefully like rested a little bit, but I would say even if you have been resting, give yourself a few more weeks maybe before you start to, we'll call it, say, rebuild maybe for the Sydney Marathon. I mean, I think, yeah, doing 17 miles this weekend without a look at your training plan, I would say, probably too much. And I think that you should be okay and comfortable with skipping, say, one or two of your scheduled long runs just to kind of promote recovery. I would say, get to a point where you feel like you want to run either fast or far again, and then give yourself a few more days after that, and then sort of restart your rebuild maybe for the Sydney Marathon. And maybe, I would say be more conservative. I mean, obviously you're in shape and you ran the Grandma's Marathon. And so I would just say, be a little bit more conservative in the rebuild versus thinking you have to squeeze in every single thing that was planned for your city marathon block, kind of going back to this idea of being a little bit flexible, and just having kind of confidence in your training there. But don't jump back into either a long run or a workout, I think, before you feel you're maybe more than ready. So, 110%, that's very subjective, obviously. But if you feel like you're still too tired and you really don't have I think motivation is a good sign of training readiness. So once you're feeling motivated again to say, oh, I want to really go and knock out a good long run or a speed workout, then I think you're probably ready to go back. But again, that's general advice, and I don't have the full scope of like your training program. So probably the best advice that I can give within that limited framework.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Kimberly, you have a question?
Hi, yeah. I wanted to like get your advice on runners who won't have optimal sleep the night before the marathon. And I know that's like an unusual question. The reason why I'm asking is I have a wedding in Gettysburg the night before. No, I can't skip it. So and that's like I think 3.5 hours away from the starting.
Don't think it's an unusual question, actually. And I think it's something on a lot of runners' minds because whether it's logistically or whether you just have like pre-race anxiety, which I know like I do the night before the marathon and typically just not getting great sleep, regardless of how much you try to plan for it. What I would say, to be honest, and this is both in personal experience, I think in the experience of others, as well as kind of some science backing this up, but that and that maybe, this will seem odd to say, but controversial, but the night before doesn't really matter how much you sleep. What matters is the sleep that you're getting in the week leading up to the race. The night before, I really just don't think it's going to have that much of an impact on performance. And that's because I think these, what we'll call them stress hormones, but like, things like adrenaline and cortisol, they're very powerful hormones. And I just think that you're excited for the race, you're trained for it, and your body is just going to take over regardless of if you've slept adequately the night before. I just think the 2 nights before, 3 nights before, sleep matters a lot then. The actual night before, just don't stress too much about it and realize it really doesn't matter that much. Your body is going to take over and do what it needs to do regardless of how much sleep you've got. I recall, and personal anecdotes maybe don't mean that much, but and I was in high school at the time, but the night before I did a marathon relay with my friends, I remember, and it was after the night of prom. And I didn't even sleep. I went from school to dinner to prom. And then I left prom at 4 a.m. and drove down to the race and just
Oh my God.
and did great. So it was like, of course,
That's so much better.
18 years old, but
Right. You're
I had
18
some-
years old. Let's not forget.
so that helps. So that helps. But just a similar experience that I've had lately and heard from other runners too, where it's just like you could probably not sleep at all the night before and you'll totally be fine. The mindset, the stress hormones, that all is just going to like take over. And so the less you stress about it, the better it will be. If you can shift, I think, your mindset and thinking that if you know that really short-term sleep deprivation is just one night out of the hundreds and hundreds that you've gotten good sleep, and just have faith in like the training, I think just shift your mindset and think, this isn't really going to decrease my performance that bad. It's not that big of a deal. I think that's enough to kind of just sort of take over and wash that out. So that would be my recommendation there. Don't stress about it too much.
Okay, amazing. Mind over matter.
Yep,
Okay,
exactly.
I mean, for years, I've heard that it's like, it's all the sleep leading up the night before.
Totally.
Really sleeps that well the night before a marathon.
Really.
You're not going to hear the alarm. You're not going to miss it. You're going to get there too late.
Yeah.
All these things. No one ever has a good night's sleep. So you're just going to be having fun.
Okay, good.
Which is
Exactly.
great.
Extra,
That's how
just
I would
like
look at
maybe, extra cup of coffee, maybe.
Okay, I can do that.
Caffeinated energy gels.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Paul.
Hey, thanks for your talk. My question has to do with glycogen metabolism. I'm a retired physician, so learned the Krebs cycle a long time ago. Say you start at the race and your glycogen is 100%. And as you run and you metabolize the glycogen that you've stored in your liver and in your muscles, how much, as you're doing GU or shot blocks, whatever, how much glycogen is actually getting back into the muscle while you're running?
Yeah, I think there are some recent kind of studies on that, some of which have actually surprised me. So the answer is not a lot. And actually, some of the most recent studies show that taking gels, taking GUs, taking carbs during the run doesn't actually even prevent glycogen depletion much in liver or skeletal muscle. Maybe, and I might have this backwards, but I think that it does somewhat prevent liver glycogen depletion, but not muscle glycogen depletion. And of course, I may have that backwards, but essentially, you're not really replacing it much by having the gels. So what the gels are doing is sort of just helping to offset how much potentially glycogen you're drawing from those muscles, as well as just maintaining your blood glucose. So the exogenous stuff you're taking is just being used, essentially, not contributing maybe much to the glycogen depletion. There's some debate as to whether it even offsets glycogen depletion at all, and maybe is just you need to keep taking in fuel because your glycogen is being depleted somewhat. Your muscles are drawing from the intramuscular and liver stores during the race.
But they're not drawing from the blood. They're not taking that sugar.
Exactly, right. Basically, if you take a
back
gel,
in the muscle.
yeah, exactly. It's not going back into the muscle during. As far as like what the most recent stuff is saying, that seems to be what's happening, which is kind of interesting. It's in a way, I don't know. I think we're learning a lot still, and not a lot is resolved. But it's like there's a whole, I don't know. I'm sure you're familiar with who Tim Noakes is, but he's kind of questioning lately whether is it just like preventing low blood glucose? Is that the only reason we need to fuel during exercise? And if that's the case, do you only need something like 10 to 20 grams per hour, which I don't agree with. I think the practices of marathon runners these days would suggest otherwise. Eating 60 to 90 grams plus per hour seems to be
That's
helping in a way. Yeah, so that was a long answer to your question. The short answer is, yeah, not a lot. Not a lot is going to actually back into your muscle.
So when do you think you start on the anaerobic pathway for metabolism? At what point in the race would you personally?
I mean, during a marathon, probably never. I mean, there's some anaerobic, I guess, metabolism going on all the time, but I mean, if during a marathon, the intensity of it's probably kind of low enough. I mean, you're most likely using majority contribution of aerobic metabolism the entire time, with like that minor contribution, obviously, that is obviously just kind of happening in the background.
Interesting. One other question. If I have compression, I have a Normatec and I have a hot tub. If you had the choice to do either one, what would you do after a run?
I would definitely do the hot tub because you're gonna get some of the same benefits of the Normatec boots, and then some of those beneficial adaptations of like the heat exposure.
Yeah, that's
So I would
right.
say if you were gonna choose hot tub, but you have both, so why
Yeah.
not?
I'm also I live at 8,400 feet is where I'm training right now.
Well, gosh, you're just gonna be like, you got all the optimizations going on.
The problem is I'm 68 years old. But it's interesting. I've never trained for a whole marathon. I've been here for 12 weeks at this altitude. So I probably have way too much hemoglobin.
Maybe, but it goes down. Well, yeah, depending on when you get to are you training for Sydney or New York?
Sydney, I'm going,
Okay.
I'm getting there 3 days before the race.
Gotcha. Yeah. So not that you asked, but my recommendation there would be like kind of once you get to Sydney, if you've been doing the hot baths and you've been doing the altitude stuff, I would try to keep doing that for 1 or 2 days even before the race.
Yeah.
Like get there, and when you're in your hotel or whatever, keep doing the hot baths because you can quickly lose a lot of those beneficial adaptations. It's not going to happen in 2 days, but
Right.
ideally, like maybe other than the night before where you might not want to do a hot bath just because of the stress, try to do that once or twice when you get there to kind of maintain some of the.
Typically what I would do is run, come home, jump in the shower, and then 30 minutes on the Normatec while I'm drinking a protein and creatine shake. So, but you say do the shake, but sit in the hot tub for that period of time.
Yeah, but I like the idea actually. If you're gonna, I don't know, if you're gonna do your shake, I kind of like the idea of being in the boots because it's not like a stimulus as the hot
Right.
tub. I think you should think of the hot tub as extra training and think of the Normatec as recovery. So I think that could
Right.
maybe just help you decide which one to use. Doing the hot tub every day, I mean, it's stressful. So if you have a really, really hard workout, do the
Yeah, no,
Normatec instead.
I'm lightheaded. Yeah.
Me too. And if I overdo heat, I can certainly tell. And so I think there's kind of a trade-off to thinking, don't think of the hot tub or the sauna or whatever as just a recovery technique, but if you're doing the tub or the sauna, that's an extra 20 to 30 minutes of like training for that day. I think that's a way to think about it.
Thanks.
That's great. Sorry?
Oh,
I said I ordered his book also.
It's terrific. And when I send this recording around to everyone, I'll also include links to the book and to his site and also to his really great newsletter, your other newsletter that you took on, not that long ago, really, Brady, from Abby Burfoot, right?
Yeah.
Run Healthy, Run Long. I mean, I was a fan of that for so long. And then when I saw the announcement, I'm handing it over to Brady Holmer. I was like, yay, because I already knew who you were. But
There's a lot of
any other
pressure. I was like, gosh, I have like this Ambi's legacy to carry on. I don't know.
I
So
know.
I was
How did
honored that he
you
asked me.
not?
It's a fun newsletter to write.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I love how you've kind of added that in. And what does this mean for runners? I love that. Everyone, I don't know if you all are currently reading it, but you will be, as soon, because you could all click on the link that I send to you and subscribe. But, he goes deep into the science of new studies and as it relates to endurance running. And then, well, what does this really mean to you? What does this mean to you? And it's just, you make it, very complicated information. You make it very palatable for us to understand and then maybe apply it to our own training. So thank you for that. I'm a huge fan.
Thanks, Barbara.
You all see that. I'm a huge fan. Any other questions from you all?
Yes, I have one. I'm currently training in very high, I know we kind of already mentioned it earlier, but very high humidity and very high heat. And it seems like you really like the sauna. Is that something that you can overdo after a long run in the heat? And I'm talking 80 to 90% humidity and 90 to 100 degree temperatures. So can you overdo the sauna after a long run?
Yeah, you definitely can. So I would say, Miles, if you want to do the sauna, just kind of maybe place it after a few of your shorter, easier runs during the week, because you can definitely overdo it. And I've, certainly done it myself. And there are days here. I live in Austin, Texas, and it's very humid and hot. And so if I do a run, I mean, most of the time I'm like, the thought of the sauna kind of disgusts me after a run. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to use it today because I'm just going to be, cooked literally and metaphorically for the rest of the day. So yes, so you can certainly overdo it. And at some point, it probably starts to become counterproductive if you're just so fatigued and can't recover properly for the next day. So on the one hand, there can be too much of a good thing. Sauna's great. I just extol all of its benefits, and I'm a huge fan of it, but you can certainly overdo it. So I would just think of what workout you're doing that day. If you're doing a speed workout or a long run, maybe forgo the sauna, maybe just do it on one of your recovery run days. I think that would be a good idea. And even maybe, if your training's good and you're confident in how much you're running, I think you could almost just say, oh, maybe instead of an extra 2 or 3 miles today, I'm going to use the sauna. I mean, I think to a point, adding for most of us, running more is going to be the best thing for our running. But, if you're kind of tired on one day, you want to cut your run short, add the sauna instead. And just, again, think of it, as I just mentioned with the hot tub, another additional a training stimulus.
Gotcha. And then one more thing. I think it's probably because it's so hot here, but there's no local races in the next between now and the race in Sydney. And talking to a lot of people, it's stimulating, like trying to replicate that start time and running with other people. How can you do so? Like I don't have a race locally that I can go and run in. Is there anything that would help with that?
Yeah, and that's hard. I think maybe the best thing would be, if you have people who you train with regularly, is to maybe just plan, and it could be kind of something fun, but I don't know, maybe plan like an event one weekend. You're going to do a race simulation like at a park, set up some water, set up a start time, and maybe make it feel kind of like a race. That could be one thing to do. If it's like a motivation thing for you, maybe, and you just want something to maybe mimic a competition, you could sign up for like a Strava, like a virtual race or something. I know that's not really the same thing, but yeah, I'm in a similar scenario. It's like, it's hard to find anything other than a 5K over the summer in Texas, which kind of stinks. But yeah, I don't know if I have any great recommendations though, other than that. Sorry.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate everything.
I know where you're living in Louisiana, right?
Yep, in New Orleans. So
Oh
it's
man,
I
yeah,
mean,
only getting hotter.
swampy
yeah,
down
it's
there.
pretty hot and steamy there. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
indeed. Any other questions? No, I think not. So I think we're gonna let you go, Brady, unless, do you have like just some final thoughts for everybody about just any tips, final tips?
Yeah, I guess maybe somewhat of a tip, but I just think one of the concepts that I'm like super interested in lately is this idea of, it's kind of this new pillar of endurance performance that they've like identified. They're calling it physiological resilience or physiological durability. And I'm super interested in it. So I just think maybe I could talk a few minutes about it and like why it's beneficial and how maybe you all could use it. So it's basically the idea of like, it's not grit or like your mental toughness. It kind of maybe sounds like that. Oh, you're resilient. You're like, you want to be a resilient runner so you can run far and run long. But it's this idea that improving the strength of your body so that you're declining basically less throughout the race. It refers to basically so when you start a race, you have your VO2 max is a certain level. Basically your fresh condition, your VO2 max, whatever your race pace is. But the idea of resilience kind of says that, as you run the race, maybe your race pace was a 7 out of 10 at the start. And even if you run that same pace throughout, it becomes an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 near the end of the race. Your resilience is sort of declining. And there's an idea that you can train it. You can train it by doing like these long run workouts, by doing these sustained kind of tempo runs, by strength training. That seems to help it because your muscles fatigue less. And so I think, maybe my tip there would just be to think about ways that you can train that improve just your ability to kind of sit at that marathon pace, which isn't the most uncomfortable pace, not like a 5K pace, which sucks for everybody, but do workouts that, finish your long runs faster than you started. do a couple hard miles at the end of your long run, even, you know, using the sauna or strength training. Think about how these are going to improve your ability to sort of maintain your running form and your pace without sort of degrading into fatigue throughout the race versus just like, how do I get faster? Because with resilience, basically it says that if you improve your resilience and, you know, how I kind of just defined it, you can become a better runner without actually getting quote unquote faster. So even if you don't get fitter, if you can improve your ability to run at your current fitness for longer, then you're going to run a faster marathon, regardless if you actually get faster. So, you know, again, not to like plug the newsletter, but I wrote about the idea, and I could probably, you know, elaborated on it a little bit more in like my newsletter, where you can, I'd probably do a better job of describing how I did it just now. But it's this interesting idea in endurance sports that I'm kind of obsessed with lately, which is it's fun and different ways to train it. So I'd encourage people to maybe look into that concept, and you might learn something.
Oh, that's fascinating. I want to learn more about this. And you said you did write about it, or you
I did, yeah. It's on my not the Run Long Run. Well, it is on the Run Long Run Healthy, and I think we even did a podcast on it. So there's a video on that newsletter about it. Also on my Physiologically Speaking one too. I wrote about resilience in like a 2-part series. So there's stuff out there, and people should be able to find it. But I can maybe send you some links as well for those who want to read more
Okay,
about it.
and I'll include that in the whole email so that it would be a really good resource for everybody to go a little bit deeper. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you all for joining in. Brady, this was amazing. It was exactly what I was hoping it would be and what I knew it would be once, you know, you agreed to join us tonight. So I really, really thank you for the time so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Barbara. Thanks for everyone for tuning in and staying a little bit past our, you know, allotted time. I think hopefully you all learned something, and feel free to, you know, reach out on social media, email, you know, whatever. I like talking about this stuff. So if you have any follow-ups or whatever, just feel free to follow up. But yeah, I appreciate everybody taking the time. It was great to come and chat with you all, and good luck in the races. Good luck at New York. Good luck in Sydney, and I'm sure you all will do really well.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I will send a link to this recording and a bunch of other stuff. So, you know, tomorrow, stay tuned. Brady, you too. And Brady, I'll be in touch with you as well.
Sounds good, Barbara. Thanks a lot.